Hi, I'm here with Mark Palmquist, CEO and MD of Graincorp, and Michael Whitehead, Director of Agribusiness Insights at ANZ. We're just back in from a lunch held for Cedar Agribusiness, sponsored by Allen's, at which both Mark and Michael spoke. Thanks very much for joining us.
Welcome.
Thank you. Mark, I might address this question to you first. You gave a great presentation on the necessity for investment in freight infrastructure, particularly its importance in the grain supply chain. As you know, the grain supply chain also involves ports and it involves storage. So on the whole, how do you rate Australia's grain supply chain internationally?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jeremy. I don't think there's a way to just rate it good, bad, higher, lower, whatever, because there's so many different circumstances by country. But if I take components of the supply chain, then I can look at those and really understand how they do rate to different areas. So if I look at country facilities as an example, they have to be designed differently in Australia because so much of the grain comes off the farm right off a harvest. So it has to receive fast, but then also it has to store. And so that's good, but there's still investment that needs to go on that side. Then if I take the transportation side of it, and if I look at the truck versus rail, truck tends to be very competitive inside of Australia. It's the rail side that has issues to it. And those issues are reflected by the ability for the upcountry facilities to be able to load fast enough, the ability to be able to receive a full unit train on the siding so that you don't have to break it up and shunt the train as you load it. And then it goes on to the branch lines and the main lines where we need investment there that hasn't been there for 30, 40 years, sometimes longer, so you can handle the appropriate weight of the train so we can load the wagons to full capacity and that we can run them at speeds that increase the velocity. Then when I go to the port side, that's relatively good. From a costing structure, it makes pretty good sense. But again, Australia is different than a lot of different areas, and a lot of it has to do with the volatility in terms of production. So you have to be careful that you don't overcapitalize the supply chain to handle the peaks, but in the same respect, you got to have a very good supply chain that fits into it. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about capital, but it's also about the process, and that is trying to integrate as many components as you can inside that supply chain. Because there's always savings in between the components that are inside a supply chain. So it's just improving the productivity, and that can be with your people, it can be with your processes, and it also can be with the assets themselves.
So but back onto the investment piece, and particularly on freight, I mean, how do you see us solving that puzzle? Where do you think that money, how should it be funded? We're looking at state investment, federal investment, private investment?
Yeah, actually all three. So if you look at the supply chains inside of Australia, it's actually owned by all three. And so that's where that investment then has to come together. So if I take ourselves as Graincorp, we can make the investment in our upcountry facilities and in our port facility. But then when I look at the rail side, if we don't have the investment by the owners of the rail, then it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to spend the capital, for instance, in improving the speed in an upcountry facility, being able to load in 4 or 5 hours, if I don't have the investment made on the siding so that I can get a unit train placed as one unit. And a lot of those sidings are owned by state governments. And then when you start looking at the branch lines, and if you look at the main lines, those are owned by both state government as well as the federal government. And so that's their area to make the investment. What's important is that we have the ability to attract the capital, either from the government or from the private side, that will make the investment in the infrastructure that really will benefit everybody throughout the chain, from the grower to the consumer, for years to come.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Michael, as you know, at our lunch today, a lot was talked about the agricultural white paper on competitiveness. What's your views on whether it did hit the right priorities?
The agricultural white paper, which came out recently, was obviously eagerly awaited, and it had been put off. And when it was finally released, you could say it's a good framework, and it's a good start, and it sets down what are the issues and the challenges. But what it probably needs a bit more of, and the next step, is urgency. We cannot be complacent. We know the agricultural demand story. We know our skills. We know what Australia is capable of. But we can't kid ourselves that Australia is the only place in the world that can't attract the investment dollar and the capital to take advantage of this. So what that paper needed to do, and what the next step I'm sure will do, and whether it's government or whether it's industry coming together to make sure it happens, is to set out where the urgent needs are to be improved, to be rectified, set down, I think quantify what the metrics are in terms of where productivity needs to change, set down where value can be captured in that chain, the food supply chain, food and agri supply chain, to rectify that as well, and then to take that message out globally in a form that is marketed and which is open and acceptable and in a way attractive to the investment community too, to make sure that happens.
Thanks, Michael. And as we discussed, we talked about investment, a lot of our discussions about investment, and one of the issues the white paper has talked about, and I know you raised at our lunch, was the role of super funds in that investment. Perhaps you can talk us through why is it they're not investing as much as we'd like them to, and what we can do about that.
Jeremy, it's an interesting question. It's a question that comes up a lot, and I dare say it's a question that we really shouldn't be asking. We need to move on from. We have this expectation in Australia that perhaps we want a quick fix to things and we want things rectified. But we are asking our super funds, our funds that will look after us after retirement for so many of us, to go into what is a volatile industry and an industry that is specialised. Those of us who've worked in agriculture all our lives, whether in production, whether in processing and logistics as well, know that it's an industry which often has very challenging returns. It is becoming more, as it consolidates and becomes more efficient, becoming more predictable as well. But on the other hand, we're talking about our superannuation funds, which have traditionally and quite sensibly allocated themselves to blue chip stocks, manage their risk profile, whether in other assets such as commercial real estate, offshore stocks as well, and have run well then. The impetus needs to come from both sides. The impetus needs to come from the agriculture and the agribusiness sector to once again present itself in a way that acceptable returns and acceptable risk profiles will be there, and acceptable investment cases and acceptable vehicles as well, whether they may be ETFs, whether they may be listed equities in agribusinesses as well that weren't there in the past, whether they may be other offerings there as well. The impetus needs to come from the superannuation funds to continue to learn more about the sector and to learn where they can allocate themselves to satisfy those who are part of them, but also to play a major role in improving the returns the other way. And we come back to your previous question as well. Part of the role of government, industry needs to come together to work on this, to promote itself, and government, while allowing the private sector to work and create efficiency and not impede in what private sector does best, government needs to play a certain role to make that happen too.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.